Hello. We should be live. SOLI Deo GLORIA. I'm just going to cover up the chat, and I'm going to give everyone. Let me just get arranged here. I don't have tons of space. Bear with me. Just a moment. I hope everyone is doing amazing. It's been a chaotic time for energy. There is a certain type of confusion flying through the airs that's causing this. Seems to be a really quick up and down between a high vibrational being and a low vibrational being. I think what is happening is there's a conflicting energy occurring right now, and the collective is essentially looking at some of these areas of rigidity in their self through the Pisces energy in that moon. And then, you see suddenly this flaring up through some of the events and things of recent history that just occurred, which highlights this for the collective. The entire world is sort of observing all of these things. And so we see a lot of weird things come out into the woodworks, so to speak. And so for many people, this may feel like a somewhat crazy time. And it is, it is a crazy time. So I thought that what we can do is the same thing that, I try to recommend, but talk about the most effective spiritual practice that can possibly be done. And, it's not really a secret or anything like that. It's not really it's not really a trick. It's really just somehow we all just lose sight of this. And so I'm hoping that we can talk this through. There's a whole bunch of different points I want to talk about in regards to it, and then if we have questions or other experiences, things we want to talk about after that, we can do like more Q&A type stuff and interactive stuff. So feel free, if anything gets inspired, you want to share it as I talk, please just go ahead. And if you're watching in the future, just comment, and I try to respond and read. I read everything, every comment. I try to respond to most if I can. So first, let's say that life is the plan, right? Life is the plan. It's the divine plan is life. Unfolding in front of our face is the plan. God or Christ is the master, depending on how we want to frame that. The universe, the infinite creator, is the master. The spiritual teacher, the human that we see that teaches us, is the teacher. And we are the student. We're always the student. This is a very important understanding, that even when we're the teacher, we're still the student. This helps us also realize that the teacher that we're observing is also a student, no different than us. Perhaps they've went through different lessons beyond what we're currently in, and that's why we're probably listening to them. Perhaps that, or they're helping to sustain us spiritually. They're helping to remind us more truth about what we are, and more, ground us into these things. I just call that, spiritual sustenance. This is somewhat what Jesus meant when he says, "Drink of my life." This is one aspect of what he meant, was drink of the sustenance I'm giving you in the affirmations of what is true of you. What he's also saying, though, is to drink of his life being the Christ consciousness. The consciousness itself is the life-sustaining frequency here. It is sort of what we are naturally. We just sort of cloud ourselves from that. And so there's a bunch of different layerings to that. But what we want to do is notice the most powerful spiritual practice, or sadhana, the absolute most profound one we can ever do, is simply to approach life as if it is our spiritual practice. we approach life as if life itself is the spiritual moment, is the meditative moment, it is the devotional moment, as much as possible. And this seems like a really tall order to the ego. Well, that just seems impossible. No, that's just the ego making stuff up. So we just ignore that type of thought. What we do is we just gradually move into it as most comfortably as we can. And we recognize that essentially, I think this was in the Bible. Maybe it was in Course in Miracles. I don't know where this came from, but it's to err is human. Like to make error and to have cognitive dissonance and get confused and do something that's not quite in alignment is human. We do that often. You know, I did it multiple times today. But God doesn't make mistakes. So this paradox of we are God, yet we're making these little errors, and God doesn't make mistakes. So what's going on? Essentially, like our free will and our ability to inform our perception and awareness causes us to perceive things incorrectly, essentially, which then informs a mistake seeming to have occurred or an error. And it's really interesting that when we step back of all of it and we pull all the way up, what we see is that we have collectives of souls that are all kind of being shepherded by different teachers. And we have certain frequencies that are being more offered up into the Akash. So when I'm talking like this and people are listening and vibing, whether they already knew what I said that's essentially what's happening, is they're just remembering that what I'm saying is true. And they start to vibe with all that and re-influence that into the Akash, and starts to build this positive polarity in the consciousness, draws more up into Christ consciousness. The flip side of that is that the brighter that burns, the darker that contrasted shadow goes. So that's why sometimes we have these like delays, and like some of the people that are maybe your spiritual go-tos maybe like kind of disappear a little bit. Some of them are very, very consistent, but we go through all of us go through our own little dark night things. And, you know, usually if we're teachers, we don't want to speak during those too much, because we're usually in like a quite imbalanced state, or we're not integrated and we kind of know it. So at least for me, that's how I approach it, is if I'm feeling that lack of integration, then I just kind of step aside and just wait it out and let it do what it needs to do in me before I start to try and teach about it, or, you know, anything like that. Because I know also that on the other side of that, I'm going to see everything very differently. So always the teacher is the student, and the real master lesson plan is life itself, what's unfolding in front of our faces. So even the teacher, the master, even like Jesus, for example, only existed here because he was still learning. Like, he was putting flesh here and a body here to learn. Not just as the entity that we might call Yeshua, or the mind-body-spirit complex that we call Yeshua, or Jesus, but also that the being that overseer of that, the higher self, is learning from that too. Depending on how we frame it. And there's different layerings to it. It's very complicated if we want to actually start to systematize it. So instead of doing that at this level, which most people aren't privy to really, like aren't able to notice, what we do is just sort of ignore a lot of that. We ignore a lot of that mystery around, well, what's the exact thing called, and these types of things. At this stage in the game, it's better to really simplify the metaphysics into, there's a Christ itself, is my higher self, and I'm trying to embody that. And the way I embody that is I make every moment spiritual in nature, godlike in nature, bring God into everything. So we do that by noticing that the plan is specifically created for us by us, and it aligns with God's plan. And we start the day with God, just remembering God, and God guides me in these things. However we do that, and it doesn't really matter. We want to express sort of, thanks for helping me to see through your eyes, helping me to see the unconditional love, helping me to be merciful the way you are and graceful like you. These types of things. Thank you for these things, affirming that these things are going to be experienced throughout our day, basically. And then when we are approached in moments, we're trying to notice, instead of just reacting to things, we're trying to say, we're trying to say, God, how would God respond here? How would the Lord respond? Or however we see it. So for me, I see God as a primarily masculine figure, however, integrated the feminine aspects and lets the feminine actually make the decisions. So that's for me. This helps me to let the heart lead. And I think this is different for everyone, actually, I think. So some people want the mind to kind of lead, and some people want the heart to lead, or some souls, you could say. I think this is a bit of a digression that happens in our soul. We have a certain preference to masculine leadership or feminine leadership. One of them has to sort of take the reins and make the decisions in a consistent way, usually. Otherwise, we end up experiencing this dissonance or a little bit of disharmony or an inner conflict with ourselves until we sort of select a way. I'm still learning about that, but that's how it feels for me, is that there's this inner sort of barometer of which way are we going to go with. Are we going to go with what we know is true and go like just the wisdom way, ignoring how the heart's feeling? Because the heart also can be a little confused, like the soul is still learning, right? So the soul sort of sits in the heart, and it also is learning. So that's more what we are learning as, is that soul. So we start our day, and then we try to move through the day, coming back to God with everything. Essentially everything we do. Everything is a spiritual test, challenge, practice. You'll notice that you have a belief. Somehow the belief is challenged, and that belief falls apart, and a new belief is formed. So usually it's a fear belief that I'm not good enough for people to respect me, let's say. And someone disrespects me, and then I realize, I was giving this power and it didn't actually need to have power over me, so I let that go. I build a new thing that people do respect me because I respect myself, and I give myself the respect I deserve. It doesn't really matter what other people do. We shift into that, and then the challenge of someone disrespecting you reapproaches. And it may do this a little, quite a bit even. Depends on the resistance in ourselves. How much do we need to test that new foundational belief? And when we notice that that's always what's happening, and if we're able to step back, like what we're trying to do is notice that emotions and stuff really just stir us into acting wacky. Like a lot of times we think emotion, because it's inspired by love, if it's positive emotion, we like get really addicted to it. And then if it's negative emotion, we also still get very addicted to it. Whether we notice the sweetness in the sorrow or not, the being is feeding from it. It's feeding off its own energy that it's generating, like in almost like an addictive thing. It's a compulsive addictive thing that we do with emotion. We need to sort of understand that a little bit, that our emotions are essentially like positionality. It's like our opinions. It's sometimes our heart or soul's opinion. And that's okay that opinion's there. But if that opinion's being challenged by something that's true, like it's no different than the mind having a thought that's not true, right? The heart or the soul can also be confused and is confused. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. Essentially, the reason to exist is to be confused a little bit all the time. Like a little bit. Even at the most highest of high levels, there's a bit of confusion around, well, what am I exactly doing, and who am I helping, and what am I doing? It's all, there's always mystery until there's not, and then you do it again. So it's always the same thing. So what we're trying to do is get on board with, I'm calling in the spirit to invest the vessel. I'm calling in the highest self or the Holy Spirit to invest my frame now. And that throughout the day, I'm just going to make everything I can as sacred as I can. Like bring sacredness to everything, basically. We want to clear the programming as well that God and religion have something to do with each other. Man and women, but man created religion, right? It's a product of the mind. And when we think of like fundamental religion of any kind, any dogmatic fundamental beliefs are fundamental, right? Mental. They're thoughts. And when we get really invested in the thoughts, then we start to get confused. And so a lot of us actually don't realize that we actually are pushing away a lot of this surrender to God type thoughts, because they remind us of what religions have done with people as far as like control mechanisms and fear and different things. And so I'm not meaning to say anything negative about the religions, because them in themselves, I essentially love and respect any attempt to seek God. So it all has a purpose to it. And of course, humans that can't fully grasp what they're learning or talking about and not feeling it within properly are going to make up whatever they can to try to figure it out. So essentially, it's sometimes a little confused and just read a little wrong, read literally. It's read through a lens of separation or duality, so the Christ's words aren't understood by people that see it that way. But we'll notice that actually, like, mainstream religion is actually starting to shift more back to God, making God the thing. And then even New Age, like spirituality and stuff, and even myself, God, coming back to this God stuff. We've experienced essentially in this world the dissolution of God understanding. Like, no one knew what God could even be because of how vastly confusing it is to even navigate all the realms of thought. So some of us just said, okay, well, it's this one. We just hang on to that. But everyone around us is sort of going, no, it's this one or that one, and none of it's real. And, we've watched the society and humanity crumble into this godlessness, which we saw with Nietzsche's writing. And then now we're seeing the reconstruction of the true infinite power and peace of God, which has nothing to do with religion. And religions themselves are becoming, up and sort of aware of the idea that, I guess it wasn't just us who knew God. It's not really like that. Even they are starting to essentially just promote unity and oneness even. There was a mainstream thing that I saw the other day from some, big church speaking person. I don't even know what her title is or anything. But I know she was a big thing. And basically she was just talking about oneness. And she was saying, why are people fighting for things in the name of God? God wouldn't be wanting fighting this way, right? And it's against the teaching of love and forgiveness that the Christ teaches. So what, right? So we're trying to clear that, a lot of that stuff. And when we're talking about surrendering to God, that's usually what the ego will throw at us. Like these types of things, like, oh, you sound like you're a fundamentalist, something or other. It's actually like, this is some of the fundamentalist stuff that is actually really wise, is these types of things, devoting everything to God. That is where the peace and bliss and power of peace comes from. Within, that's where it comes from, is the pure trust and devotion in God. However you can fathom to do that. That's where it all comes from, because once that is there to enough of a degree, there's no more question of fear or any disharmony, really. even when the person is experiencing like a challenging moment, there's this undercurrent of blissful peace. And that just strengthens actually, and rises and rises and strengthens. It just gets more and more strong. And we want to remember as well that the flesh is weak, but the spirit's strong. The flesh is weak, but the spirit's strong. We're essentially training ourselves in the flesh to bring the spirit into the day, the whole day, all of the day, in its entirety, and to have faith and trust that as all is necessary, is everything that I could possibly need is unfolding right in front of me. Maybe I'm not seeing it, but it is. It has to be. And so I'd like to be able to see that. I'd like to be able to experience that as spirit does, which is in a perfect way, unconditional, open-hearted love at what is. That's what we're seeking, which allows us peace. So when we talk about spiritual sadhanas or other things that we do, meditation, breathing, whatever it is, these are all amazing. But these don't really have anything to do with our presence and peace throughout the day, necessarily. What these things do is help us build sustenance, help us feel connected. And we're all different. So, what I would say is if you do that, those practices, and then you just go and walk out into the street and are suddenly sort of frustrated by the world, like you have to wait for a red light and you're like annoyed by it, or any little things like that, what we're doing there is we're essentially making it like we can be spiritual during these special moments, and then the rest of the day we're just a regular Joe just running around, or however we see that. But we're trying to hold ourselves a little bit to a bit of a higher standard if we want to. We don't have to do this. But this is what actually brings about the peace, is doing this. But it seems kind of contradictory to itself. It seems like we're supposed to pursue comfort in order to be comfortable. But we actually pursue this peace and devotion to the Creator inside, which then the comfort just falls into our face. It just falls in front of us. Miracles just start to fall in our ways, and follow us around. And we start to notice them, and we realize that these were always following us around in different ways. And the other thing is that the most important thing we can do, this is the last thing, and then I'll look at questions, see if anybody has anything to add. The most important thing any being that ever has existed could ever do is self-realize. We often attribute our goodness with our activities, what we're doing. In truth, the only thing we are doing is trying to self-realize. And once we recognize that that's what we're doing, that's what this is self-realization school. This is a school of actualization of self. This is a school of enlightenment. That's what this is. That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here. We're just really just accepting that's what this is. And that means noticing that we're going to have a whole bunch of stuff come up. And life's about challenge and change and shifting and riding the waves of that. That's what life is. And, we are essentially graduating up and up into more and more creative power, you could say. What that needs to come with it is certain lessening. We need to understand things about things before we start to have more of that power, you could say. If we can't handle getting cut off in traffic, how are we going to feel if we're trying to manage an actual entire globe as a creator being or a logos later in our evolution? We wouldn't be able to manage it. We'd have our beings doing things that are our children doing things, and we would try to fight with them. And you see what I'm saying? And this is what it sounds wacky, but that is what is already happening here, which is the sun, you in the sun. That's what the sonship is, or the Son of God. It's both the frame, or the word, and the logos, the thought, the original thought of the creator, of this logos. That's already happening. And that's weird, right? That's super weird. So yeah, let's go to the question, see if there's anything. Sarah says, totally agree. Great reminders. Thank you. Yeah, it felt like it was important to bring it all back to God, because on the channel, I do that. I kind of go back and forth, because we can get lost in the playing, in the illusion, and we kind of want to come back to the God stuff. and this truly is the most powerful way that I've figured out. This and forgiving God, those two things were critical for me to find a more lasting peace. I didn't realize how upset I was with God, but then I realized that God's everything, so anything I'm upset with is God. And I was like, well, I better forgive the source of all that then. I didn't even blew my mind that I'm like, oh, but I love God, don't I? I guess part of me was upset, right? So that was the biggest thing. Forgive God. Stop presuming you have any comprehension of what God could do, right? That type of thing. And then just be like, well, you know what? I couldn't possibly comprehend this design at this layering of my consciousness. I just couldn't possibly. So I either believe that God's on my side or not. Obviously, if God's on my side, the knower of all things, the lover of all things, then I guess I just have to trust, right? So we forgive, we trust, and then the devotion starts to really come in. Yeah, observer mode and curious. That's a really good place to be as well. Usually that indicates for like, I would say that indicates a really good understanding and like baseline of like, I'm just a thing here watching all of this. Like, there's times actually that that's my default kind of state. I have to actually invest a lot of energy actually to convince myself that I'm Sean, and I have to do stuff. Like, it's actually challenging for me a little bit to come into Sean and do the Seanness of things with my children and with I have things to do. And so I actually need these things in my life to like keep me here. Otherwise I'd just float off somewhere, I think. And so even these little challenges of like, sometimes I'll be in observer mode and I'll be just like kind of looking at my children, and my daughter will be like, Dad, and I'm just looking at her, and I'm thinking like, I'm right here, I'm looking at you, and I won't say anything. I almost forget that we need to speak sometimes. And it's just cute because it's just my daughter's like, Dad, and then I'm like, but it goes this little back and forth, and then she's like, why aren't you listening? And I'm like, I'm looking at you anyway. But we have these little moments, and these are like the little challenges, because I want to do that better, right? I don't want her to be waiting on me to respond. I don't. It's not fair to her. She's not sure what's going on, right? So these are things, little subtle adjustments that we're trying to make as we, come from observer back in. And a lot of times when I'm an observer, I don't even notice my name. I don't hear them that way. I'm just feeling the stuff that's going on. I don't really know what anyone's saying. It's just, there's a lot of stuff happening in this moment now with me. It's all a mystery. What a wonderful, strange mystery that's occurring around me. That's kind of my default state. This place is just nuts. I don't know what's going on anywhere. And then I come into Sean, and then I'm, with the children, and I just can't help but be so excited and in love with them that it's very challenging for me to tell them not to do things. That type of stuff. This is some of the challenges as parents, I think. And this is why it's so important to bring God into everything, including the parents. Like, how would God parent this child? Seems like a tall order, doesn't it? I don't even know what that means. So then we go in to ourself. We check in with how we perceive the all-father, all-mother, divine holiness of everything. How do they parent us? Unconditional love, wisdom. Unconditional love first, wisdom. Unconditional love, wisdom. You know, it's like this, right? So you want to give the kids both. You want to give everyone both. And you don't want to pretend that the human knows how to do that. And once we basically say, hey, help me do the thing here, you know, without you, I'm not able to be anything. So help me pour my waters on these people in your holy way, in your pure way, God, right? And this is how we start to root in the Christ consciousness into our being. We will start to feel like a Jesus. Like we will, pretty much. What we're trying to actually do is unify all the different archetypal gods we've found into the Christ in our day-to-day living. So we'll experience all these various things that archetypally are essentially the shadows of the gods that we used to in our heritage or lineage worship, usually. That's what we'll usually experience on this sphere as a soul. So for mine, I came here, the Shan soul came here around 75,000 years ago and has been going for a while. So there's been all these rooted beliefs in all these different deities, which form the archetypes that now we're going back in a non-linear way, healing all of it, and recognizing and exalting. I like that word, exalting them into their divine truths, you know, casting aside the shadows of things and then bringing it all up into light, noticing the goodness in some of the evil characters and things like that. And we do that primarily, depending on what our life is, we do that primarily through reflections in our environment. And then we notice how these interact with these ancient stories as well. Interesting. And sometimes we get a little wrapped up into it and think it's like, that's literally what's happening right now. And it is, but it's non-linear. Like that's happening then too, right? Sarah says, some of the younger nonverbal kids I feel are almost trying to convey. Yeah. If you actually really honestly come into their aura, like you have to be pretty close to them usually to make it easier. But if you actually are asking the soul authentically, what are you trying to convey to me? You'll usually start to get impressions. This is fun to try with children and anyone, mostly children, because they're usually wide open. If they're under 7 or 8, whether they're looking at you or not, you can start to read them that way. You're reading the soul, you're letting the soul speak to you. It's a lot of interesting stuff we can learn just by being in that observer curious state. If we're wrapped up emotionally and invested in all the frame and all the bodiness of things, then we can't see at that level. We're wrapped up in stuff. We're deluded into the world in that moment. And that's okay. I have to delude myself all the time. I have to do that all the time to function here. I'm doing it to a degree now. So it's totally fine. But we start to read their mind. Because, and I've said this a few times, I think, but to an entity that's in 4th density or higher in their consciousness, the 3rd density is transparent. So the mind, body, spirit complex is transparent. The thoughts are visible things. There's no hiddenness here. There seems to be hiddenness. There seems to be secrets. But it's not quite the case. It's all right in front of our face, so to speak. And when we begin to open the psychic awareness and then test these little things, we don't I'm not saying we go and try to read people's minds and steal from them weird things. If we do that, we'll end up bashing into things that really show us not to do that. So I'll just say that even though it's transparent, to seek out these things in a non-loving way is not going to be wise, I would say. It's going to be something you get slapped back. The universe will slap you back, basically. But if you're doing it from a loving way, like if you're seeking simply to understand how best to serve the soul, that's what I'm talking about. That's when it's most clear as well. When you're just like, I just really want to serve the soul, how best to serve. Like a lot of times the soul, you might even hear space, distance, you know, they want distance right now. They need distance is probably the best answer. These types of things. And you're taking that information to then, you know, like I'm saying, if your child's upset and, you know, they're just not wanting to engage right now, like those types of things, like how can I actually help? And the truth of the matter is that they need some space. But the parent in you wants to just calm them. There's these types of situations that arise. But if we go to the divine self, and we purview it from that space, we start to know that, oh, they actually do need space. They're just crying it out. They're getting out their emotion about whatever just occurred. So Sarah says, also had to do a lot of work grounding into my humanity and viewing mundane things as really cool spiritual endeavors, like the cleansing of a shower. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Cooking a meal. You know, I started to try and get my kids in this blessing and God-oriented mind because we haven't really talked about it in my house too much. I try to make everything sacred. Everything is such a magical mystery as best I can. The mundane seems mundane because we're not noticing the depth that is there. Like you're saying, essentially exactly like you're saying. When we're noticing that too, the soul's actually really inspired. We're actually doing a lot of really cool transmutation in that state as well. So even just being able to do that and see things this way is actually very helpful to the collective consciousness, believe it or not. It's one of the reasons some of us are even just here to just kind of do that. Whether or not we teach or do anything, say anything about any of this to anybody, we're cleaning up karma. We're previewing karma from a higher density of consciousness and cleaning it up because we see beyond the flesh that might be weak, might be afraid, but the spark is there. And what an interesting interplay of things happening here on so many infinite levels. It's mind-boggling. So to suggest a moment's mundane is just absolute insanity, basically, right? But of course, moments do feel mundane. So I'm not trying to shame anyone, of course. You know, I have them as well. I'm like, this feels like a boring moment. And then I laugh at myself because I realize, usually pretty quickly, wow, I just thought the moment was boring. Wow. Yeah. The moment is always as bananas as it always has been, because there's only that one moment that exists. But I start like trying to bring God into the kids stuff. Like I started to say, bless this meal and the hands who prepared it. So I'm doing it slowly because for me, I don't want to just dump God into the household in a weird way. So I'm just trying to help the kids notice that daddy is calling to a higher power to do these things. And I did like happy I love you day at 1:43 p.m. The phone goes off and there's like an alarm and happy I love you day. And we're dancing around and cheering for I love you, right? Like just that's what the day is about. That's what things are about, is love and God and blessing each other and blessing who created stuff for us and who's given us stuff, thanking each other for our gifts, those types of things, not just out of a rigid politeness, but out of a true thank you. I appreciate what you're giving me. Thank you for making me food. These types of things. Trying to do that and trying to live the spirit. That's what allows the spirit to invest the frame, is living the spirit. The less we live the spirit, the less the spirit can invest. Like it's almost like the more fear we have, the less spirit we can be in that moment. And so the best practice then is to always just notice that this moment is the spiritual practice. This moment is we're noticing the perfection of this moment. And if we don't know where it is, we just make a note of that. Okay, I've lost the perfection of this moment. I can say that it's because XYZ occurrence, right? But that's surface level. Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. Why was I upset about these things? It's confronted beliefs about myself, deep ones, probably if I'm actually quite upset. And that's where the juicy fruit is, so to speak. That's where we find the real bounties. That's why approaching life as the sadhana, or devoting oneself to the Creator as just a humble servant. I know nothing of myself. Humble servant. This is, in my experience, the way to really open it up. Because that if that's really, truly, authentically given, there's nothing, the Creator's mercy just washes over you and cleanses you. It's a very profound thing. That someone like myself, for example, could experience something like this. I was never religious or dedicated to any of this at all in any way prior to age 33 or so. And I'm only 36. And it's literally just, I happen to notice patterns well. That's all I could say, is notice my own patterns of lying to myself really well, so well that it was very upsetting for me. The faster we wake up, the more upsetting it is, usually. But then when we finish it, when we really finish the waking up part, it's all more like, that was a really cool dream. Like, that was pretty neat. I wonder now how I can create this dream, because it's just another dream, a new dream that we call the kingdom. And we start to build that. And so while we're building that, we're still wanting to be here. We're still having stuff. We have stuff in us that wants to come out. We have experience through being here and seeing how things are here, and separation and pain and fear. And we want to create a better place. And this inspiration sits with us, unless it doesn't. And then we leave. But if the inspiration sits with us, then to really bring through the most pure thing, we dedicate that channel of divinity to basically say, I don't know. I don't know anything. Let divinity tell me what to do, what to say, how to be in any moment. And, some people are like, well, how do you even keep up with conversations? You don't need to, because the mouth just does what it does. There's nothing to keep up with or worry about. There's nothing to think about. The mind's acquiesced at that stage. So we're learning that's Jesus said, which one of you who worries has gained a day in their life, or something like that. And I think I just bastardized that quote completely. But he said that, and what he means is, like, there's nothing to worry about. Well, all of our social anxieties, should I say this or that or this? There's nothing to decide, really. You're going to say whatever you say. You're either speaking authentically or you're not. And once you start to question what I'm about to say, you start to try to shift what wanted to come out authentically and shift it into something else that's more palatable for someone else. You've now, kind of stepped away from your truth. If your truth is mean, then it's not the truth of God. So, is it mean to someone? Is it fearful and lacking? It's not the truth then. It's just a feeling. So we're learning that all the time. Feelings aren't true. Basically, they're just stimuli from the environment, from the experience, from whatever's going on. That's what a feeling is. It's an emotion. Energy is in motion, and we're noticing it. And we're, whoa, that was a big one, right? And that's great. It's perfect, that's kind of one of the better states to try to get to. And if we're not there, it's okay. If we are there, then wonderful. And I'm, I guess, trying to recommend that when we aren't in those states, that's okay. But if we remember it's a lesson, then we can make use of it. A part of us too kind of hates the idea that we're just forced to do these lessons. But we're not forced to do anything. We made up the lessons and the plan, and we're doing it. So we're, like, it's a weird fight that we have against ourselves, against the lessons. And I'm going to pull a card and just see if there's anything that wants to come out right now. Creative communication, beyond wisdom, and long-term goals. Interesting. So what I'm feeling is that most of us will be inspired, and I've talked about it on the channel. It's about creative communication and the heart's communication. That's starting with the open heart. We get this like inspiration to write and sing or whatever it is. That is where we actually collaborate within ourselves to get the knowledge that's beyond wisdom. It's the feeling of unity with God when we devote all of this to God and know that all the glory is God's, not the small selves. That's when the major gifts come in, and we'll notice just that, oh my gosh, we're so talented in something. Like suddenly, that once we notice that this creative gift that we have to communicate our heart in some way, whatever way, we're so talented at it. We'll notice that because we've basically just surrendered, that the body doesn't know, the little self doesn't really know. God knows. God's doing this. This is God doing this, which allows the little self to just get out of the way. And then the creative effort becomes godlike. It achieves that mastery status. It appears to be genius. It appears to be beautiful to some, not necessarily to everyone, but to a certain vibration or frequency. It starts to resonate like that. So yeah, so I was interesting that those things came up, because that's really the thing that I'm doing now. Is I'm noticing that heaven is absolutely right now here. The kingdom is here. And now I'm like, wow, everything that I've been saying is absolutely true and real. And now I'm like actually needing to manifest that into reality, all of the things that I've dreamt of. So it's an odd place. I almost felt like I was just gonna bloop, be gone, but I'm still here. So isn't that weird? Right? Sarah says social engagements have taken on a very real time feel, and everything is inspired in the moment. All authenticity and no scripting, and protecting peace and maintaining balance has become paramount. Yeah, exactly. It's almost like we're in this sort of what do they call it when they don't have a script? What's the word? Why can't I think of it? When they make it up on the spot. I want to say freestyle, but that's not the word. But whatever. It's not scripted. It's not, we haven't thought what we're going to say out. We just are letting our heart out. We're improvising. That's the word. That's what I'm trying to say. We're improvising. We're just letting the heart guide the experience until something affronts us and disturbs us or unsettles us. That's when we're sort of like, ugh. That's why you said, maintaining peace, boundaries, protecting it, becomes paramount Thank you, Dan. Yeah, yeah. Improvise. That's the word. I have trouble like that sometimes with words. I just can't get them. I'm sure everyone has that on occasion. But yeah, improvise. We're all like in almost like a sketch comedy troupe, really. At least this is kind of how I like to view it. I like to view everyone as sort of clowns of consciousness. Sometimes the clowns are like happy clowns, sometimes they're sad clowns, sometimes they're laughing. Sometimes they're like the overly romantic, very loving clowns. But it's all an interplay of clowning around of consciousness. And it's very beautiful in that way, but it's also a little funny. And then I like to shift between different lenses to try and see it. Yeah, exactly, Sarah. It feels like channeling 24/7, direct line to higher self. Anxiety is gone. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And even if when we step out of it and forget about it, it's almost like, well, I had to sort of, to get involved in this thing in the humanly way, I had to like kind of pretend for a minute. But what ends up happening is even during the pretending, and Sarah, hopefully you understand this experience, or you're having this as well, where you're like, even though you're in the middle of the pretending of stuff, you're also very aware that this conduit or channel is still there. For me, like, I actually start to hear there's two particular voices, Yeshua and Latui, who are just two beings that just sit. They sit in my heart, and I can just hear them all the time. So even if things are going weird around me, I can just feel these presences whispering things to me, that type of thing. But that's all because of literally like allowing God to become the thing, the devotional thing. However we see God, you know, I don't recommend that we see God in any way that a human's ever told us to. What we're really trying to do is do this so that we know God. And it's actually through doing this that the trust gets built, because we start to see the results of it very quickly, very, very quickly. Is very nonlinear in that way, that like you can make these decisions that I'm talking about right now and just immediately have a major shift without doing anything. You don't have to meditate to do that. You don't have to do anything. We're noticing just some of our actual creative power and our mind's power and belief structures and things like that. Instead of giving our power to the words of like some person somewhere that wrote a thing once, these are all interesting things that people talk about and say. What I'm doing here, it's very interesting. It's very, fun to talk about these things. Very interesting. But none of it is really, truly has anything to do with God. It's more like a resource instead of the source. Someone said that. I stole that from someone for sure. But we're resources for each other. The source is within us. So that whatever that is for us, devoting ourselves to that, to knowing that, and knowing ourselves as that. Oh, thank you, Galactic Healers. They say, thank you so much for this heart-offered, wise, spirit-to-spirit transmission. Oh, you're so welcome. Humbling. Thank you. My pleasure. Yeah, we're just improving. We're just letting spirit invest the frame, but we can't do that when the little self is going, no, I know the way. No. It's what's that ringtone? It just repeats this kind of insanity, the false self, the ego. And it's really important for us to be able to just kind of giggle at it, like, that's funny. And when we could do that in ourselves really well, we start to be able to see it a little bit like it's adorable in other people. Like, even if they're getting ragey, like I can't tell you how many times I see people freaking out at people and just going absolutely bananas on the road or something. And I'm just like, oh, that's adorable. It's adorable that they're so upset about these things. wow, you know, it's so interesting what our children get up to. That's how it feels. All of us, children of God, we all get up to some weird stuff. I'm into some weird stuff myself. I get into some weird stuff, right? Talking about weird stuff, doing weird stuff. So they're doing a different sort of weird. I don't fully understand it, but to each their own. Some enjoy picnics in the sun, and some enjoy falling into a dark lake in the moonlight. I don't know, right? Skinny dipping in the moonlight, right? It's all good. It's everyone's different picnic, you could say. It's actually better, I would say, to view reality in that kind of way. Like the soul, we don't have no idea what the soul is doing. Like the soul and higher self, we have no idea what they're doing ever. So we just have to like assume that whatever they're doing is like great for them. It's just great. Whatever it is, it's great. But we may hate it. Like it's okay to recognize as well. I hate what you're doing. I hate it. But I am glad that it's good for you or something. Now, if they're asking for our aid, then it's different. We're gonna just check in. God, how do I aid? Holy Spirit, invest me, help me to aid. Open the heart. This being needs aid. I recognize the kinship, the soul, familiarity is here. I feel you. I'm here with you. However that is. But if they're not asking for aid, then it must be perfect for them. And sometimes we like to trick ourselves. We like to go, I can hear them. I hear their soul. We only hear their soul if we've already dedicated that open-heartedness and they're not saying anything to us. We've opened our heart to them. It's very pure. If we're just saying, oh, look what I hear. No, that's a trick, probably. And these tricks are normal, and I've fallen for them a lot myself. I'm like, I've been called to say this to this person right now. It's very, very adorable that I thought that some of those times. Some of the times I was correct. So that's how we learn, though. I'm like, I have a psychic. Oh, burn! I have to tell you this. It involves your future. So I've done those things, right? As I was stepping into my remembering, because I was seeing that this seemed important to do this. It seemed totally, absolutely perfect. It wasn't until after that I'm like, oh, I get it. I didn't ask the big girl. I didn't ask the whole enchilada, so to speak. I just presumed Sean knew, right? And that's silly. Sean doesn't know anything. Sean has no idea. So it's really funny to notice these things, and we have to kind of laugh, because if we can't laugh at this, it's gonna be a bad time. It's gonna be a pretty bad time. It has to be comical. It has to be absurd. We have to kind of get used to that absurd comedy part of us that maybe doesn't quite get that absurdity is like the hilarious aspect of reality. See this as a bit of a comedic thing, if we can. And it's not to, some people might say that approach sounds like it's not compassionate. But it's actually the opposite. Compassion is to see the beauty and the love, or humor. Humor is love. Humor is a good, excited, uplifting feeling. Humor, love, compassion, joy, bliss, gratitude. To offer this to the universe in response to something that maybe is perceived by other people as just atrocious behavior is actually helping to cleanse and clear karma for the planetary being as well as yourself. And your lineages, you're all doing it all at once. So that is the way to do it. The people that say you're not being compassionate are people that want to hang around in their fear. Hanging out in fear is what they're saying. This fear that I'm in is real, acknowledge it for me. Affirm this. You're not affirming my fear. And I don't like that. So affirm it for me. And you don't have to affirm their fear. People think that compassion is just affirming fear. No, 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 no. That's not compassion. That's just propagating unwise thoughts. It's propagating falsity. It's, but again, even saying these things to people is confronting. Like, do you want to confront an ego? Is that what you want to do? I love doing it. So I have to actually kind of pump the brakes on it because I just love it. I'm just very excited about it. Can't help it. I get very excited to, I can see your ego. I would love to just say the thing, but I won't because I can tell that it's almost like a science experiment, and that's not fair to people. That's me, right? And that's I would say that's a personal secret of mine, really, is that I find some of these experiences with people to almost be testing my ability to not play with people because I can see through it so well. It's not meant to hold me above anything. It's just meant to say that I've seen these things in me, which allows me to see it in others. When you see all of yourself, you see all of others as well, essentially. So I see how my own beast, my own confused or false self would handle these different things. And that's why I can look at it as like really interesting. And when people are acting in ways that I can't understand, I really want to poke at it. And I start to ask really prying questions sometimes and get really curious about them. Because to me, it's like, oh, this is an intriguing mystery that I cannot explain. I have to understand why you were so wrapped up in whatever it is that you're telling me about, because I cannot comprehend it at all. But the challenge is that a lot of these things are surface level things, so there's no depth there. So once you start to dig, people get all the boundary. Oh, it's too much. So that's why I always say like boundaries and peace and all these things. Like Sarah made a really good point about it, that it's really important, but it's also sometimes the thing that's limiting us. So it's like this really tightrope that we walk to try and not be too stern, but also not be too laid back either, naive and just getting walked all over. There are times in my life that I know now, I found out after, that someone just basically walked all over me, up and down, jumped on my corpse and ran off. I was oblivious the entire time. I found out after and just thought it was funny. Isn't that funny? That I was apparently walked all over? Isn't it funny how upset people are about this thing that this person did? I don't even see it that way. At all. So to me, it was all a joy. So wonderful, right? But that's what happens when these states and our consciousness raises into an exaltation of the moment. We can't see the problem with it. So even if we are stomped on, our boundaries are shat on, right? Pushed around, and it's not really relevant to anything. It becomes just amusing. That's where this gets us. And it's not always amusing for me. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm constantly in that state, because that wouldn't be the case. But I try to move to that state, try to make it fun, make it like, we don't have to be so serious. And I know the world wants us to be serious, but the world's stupid, right? People are stupid. So they're just, everyone's pretty stupid. I'm stupid. We're all stupid. So we don't really need to listen to ourselves too much. Just, we need to tune into God a bit more. And then we start to be less stupid because we're listening to God. So it's, it becomes very simple, very clear. And we start to notice that even though there's all this like control seeming stuff, that right now in this age, it's even more of an illusion than it ever was. Like before, they used to like literally chase people down and burn them in the street and things. They don't do that now. Now they just yell at people. People yell at each other. Oh, that's terrifying for society to say mean things at me. Oh, it's meaningless, right? So right now we're in the perfect time to just step into whatever we wish to be, whatever we feel we are, and whatever our higher self is, whatever our deepest presence. Sarah says, becoming truly multi-dimensional and holding multiple perspectives at once. Yeah. And most of the people that are turning that on probably were ADHD or diagnosed in that way or have those symptoms now. Basically, the ADHD turned on suddenly. That's because the brain, or not the brain, but the mind is evolving. And yeah, holding multiple perspectives, you can see the boxes. You see the boxes of the thought forms, but also you see the interconnectedness. And then you see like there's like a puppeteer going. So you're sort of seeing multiple layerings of consciousness interplay with itself all at the same time. And then as long as you're not getting in the way of yourself, you're also then mirroring whatever consciousness is, hopefully choosing to mirror love instead of fear. And that's essentially like the awakened state. When we're doing that, we're in that awakened, enlightened state. So a lot of us do it in and out all day, all the time, and we then dismiss it as like, oh yeah, I was good today a couple times, but then that's the state that we're like, we're not trying to hold it, we're trying to get out of the way of it. Trying to not let our fears get us out of it, because that's our natural state. That's like our birthright, you could say. That's what the sonship is, atonement. It is all that. It's just that we stand in the way of that and saying, no, I don't have a car, or I don't have a job, so I can't be that yet. I have to like get a job first or do a thing. I have to like wait until my son is like graduated high school and moves out before I can do this or something. But it's just not the case. It's just doubts, the ego doubting. And so we just keep coming back to God, and God will keep pushing us along. Like the more bold we get, the more opens up too. And just like in Pinocchio as well, when we lie to ourselves, catch it, and then forgive ourselves for it and apologize to the universe for it, to God for it. I'm sorry, God, I noticed I'm lying to myself about this thing. The nose shrinks back, right? Like the illusion reigns in. Pinocchio represents actually the pineal gland. And, that story, if you just watch that again, you have the conscience or Jiminy Cricket sort of whispering to the pineal gland, which is the seeing eye that sees everything and the gateway to the intelligent infinity. You're wanting to learn how to be a real son of God, or the masculine principle of God, which is the body. I talked about that a little bit on the stream before, so I won't go in depth in that. But essentially the frame is sort of the masculine experience of divinity into consciousness. And then all of the inspiration and feeling and stuff is essentially generated by the feminine aspect of us, regardless of our biological sex. We could see it any other way. That's just the way that I know is accurate for myself, anyways, as far as I understand things. The masculine's the doer, right? Of consciousness. It's like the doing energy. It's like the thinking and the rational doing and stuff. So the physicality is masculine, but it's all powered by the feminine. So yeah, hour and 10 minutes. So that's a good time to shut her down, I think. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate all of your contributions. And Sarah, you've been, I think, on every stream. You're like new best friend here. So thank you so much for all your contributions, because everything that you've said has been really expanding and helpful. So very much grateful for you attending and for offering your insights. Appreciate it very much. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a beautiful, beautiful Monday night. And I will probably be on tomorrow evening. And we'll see. I might have a story for the dentist because I'm taking my son to the dentist, and that's going to be a thing. That's going to be quite a thing. So we'll see how that goes. I'm very curious about this. I hope everyone has a beautiful night. All of that.